Okay, welcome back everyone for the next set of keynote sessions and plenary sessions. And to kick off this part of this segment of the morning, we are going to look at startups and corporates, why each is trying to emulate the other. And to moderate this session is Subinder Khurana, who's member of the board, charter member of TIE Delhi-NCR. So please welcome Subinder, who will also introduce his panelists. Please.
Thank you, Amar. Could I request both Margaret and Avnish to join as well? Quick show of hands. How many of you are currently running or planning to start up? Right. So actually, I'm a startup guy myself, right? So we look at corporates as the evil empire, right? The one we have to fight. At the same time, that's the most prized partner. Every day we hope or we try to get a large company to partner with us, right? So today we have the privilege of having two very experienced people with a lot of experience of working with startups from the corporate side. And we will get an inside view of how large companies look at startups, right? So very quickly, these two leaders who have global experience in multiple top companies today, in Intel and Accenture, extensive experience of managing innovation, partnering and nurturing, working with startups to bring in that innovation and the flow of best practices and knowledge in both directions, right? Avnish, to my extreme right, he heads open innovation and ventures for Accenture, where his full-time job is to engage with startups and Fortune 500 clients to drive innovation. Margaret, to my right. We were just chatting before the session. So two very interesting nuggets I pulled out. She worked with Steve Jobs for, I think, more than 10 years, you said, right? And she's been to, I think, some 9 or 10 different countries in the last 1 month. So we will actually see, and she's a vice president at Intel. So I think we'll see the best combination of international, large company, very innovative, very strong company, and a lot of startup exposure, right? So with that, as you know, this session is all about how corporates work with startups, how do they engage, and therefore for the startup guys, for most of us, how can we best work with them, what to be ready for, what to watch out for, right? May I request Margaret to talk for a few minutes, give your perspectives on this?
I'm perfectly happy to talk for a while. Talking has never been a problem for me. So I grew up in Ireland, which is an island on the west coast of Europe with 5 million people. I find when I travel to India, our cultural beliefs and a lot of our traditions are very much in common. I moved to the United States in 1998. I was working on the original iMac project, so I had time in the lab with Steve Jobs, side by side. It was my job to tell him everything that was wrong with the product, and then he would bully the rest of the wider team in order to fix it. Bully, I mean that in a friendly term of bullying. Actually, Steve was exceptional, and it was one of the greatest periods of my life. At that time, Apple felt like a startup. To be honest, I started my career there in 1994. I moved to Intel in 2011. And, when the moderator who had started this said the evil empire and we're trying to emulate each other, for me, I see it as it's a very critical partnership with one another. I don't think that it's an emulation. I think that in the industry, we very much focus on reliable, scalable, secure solutions. And in some of our market spaces, especially for a company like Intel that's involved in the edge with the Internet of Things, and things being everything from PC to consoles to watches to automotive to any possible thing that can compute, all the way the network and to the end with the cloud. We want to work with startups. We want to know what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish so that we can be part of helping you be successful. We, at the end of the day, you know, there's Intel inside. We very much believe that there is nothing that, if it's smart and it computes, it is best on Intel. That is our mission, that is our vision, that is our statement. We very much, here in India, Sachin was telling me that in our India Maker Lab, in our innovation lab, we incubate some startups. So for the last 9 months, we've been working with 19 different startups. 14 out of those have now finished their product, and I think it's 7 of them have launched the product. So we have learned so much from working with our startup partners. We want to see the innovations, we want to see the ideas that they are taking advantage of now that we have such high performant compute in the cloud, and we have needs for low power, still performant solutions at the edge. So I see us as a very happy marriage, and we've got, you know, good synergy working together, and it's what gets me out of bed every day, other than the fact I didn't die the night before.
That's fascinating, Margaret. So you said 19 different startups you're working with right here in Bangalore, and 7 of them have already launched their product.
Yes.
Right. Sorry, so we'll come back to that, sorry, in a second. Let me turn to Avnish. So Avnish has a fascinating background. Started in the army, right? And now works for one of the top MNCs in the world, for Accenture. But his day job actually entails working with startups, as well as Fortune 500 companies, right? So Avnish, what is your perspective on this?
Yeah, thank you.
So let me just give a little bit of introduction to what Accenture does in open innovation and Accenture Ventures. I think a lot of startups which are present here and not already know about it. In fact, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I have more startup connections than any other person. I think that's the greatest validation that we definitely want to work very closely with startups. So open innovation and ventures for Accenture is a global program. I lead the India team here, and my team is all based, it's present in this room as well. So you are welcome to come and meet them after the session in our stall. We have similar teams in Silicon Valley, in London, Israel, Hong Kong, Berlin, France, and Japan as well. So what do we do as part of Accenture Ventures? 2 things. One, we look at startups like yourself, especially in the B2B space. Accenture is very big in the disruption area, right? And most of you probably know about it. We are trying to address the biggest disruption issues of our clients. And the best way to do that is to identify startups which are actually disrupting, right? And you know, we can't offer all disruptive solutions within Accenture, so we need to partner with startups like yourself. So that's the first thing which we do. We try and identify startups in the areas of IoT, artificial intelligence, machine learning, gamification, analytics, big data, and try and see how we can leverage them in our own operations in Accenture. We have close to 140,000 plus people in India only, so big operations in terms of BPO and technology. So we are constantly looking for partners like yourself who can come in and improve the productivity and efficiency of Accenture. That's the number 1 thing. Second is we do a joint go-to-market with the startups. So we have the global Fortune 500 clients are Accenture clients. Also the biggest clients in India are our clients. So we partner with startups like yourself and make this a 3-way partnership between Accenture, the startup, and our client. And that's a win-win solution for everybody. Besides these 2 things, if we find that there is a particular startup which is very strategic to Accenture, we take a strategic minority investment in the startup as well, anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million. And finally, if things are going really well, we could also do an entire acquisition of a startup, right? So this is a broad scope of what open innovation and Accenture Ventures is all about. Having said that, I'll just like to, for 1 minute, talk about while there are compelling reasons for Accenture and for corporates to work with startups, not everything is going as per plan, right? There are issues on both sides which are coming in between in terms of value creation for us to do the work together and collaborate together. And I'll talk about very quickly 5 deficits which I see in the last couple of years which we have been working with startup. The first is what we call appreciation deficit, that the corporates don't really appreciate the disruptive potential of the technology which the startup is bringing to them. And the startup on their side are not able to articulate the proposition which they are bringing to the corporate in terms of the value of their product and platform. This is what I call appreciation deficit. If you are able to get out of the appreciation deficit, you get into what I call assimilation deficit. In this case, the corporate and the startups are not able to understand and empathize with the limitations of each other's environment. So for example, the corporate struggles with integrating the startup technology into their own legacy systems, while the startup is reluctant to customize for each of the corporate clients which they are trying to work with. The third is what we call application deficit, where the corporate is more interested to do a proof of concept with a startup, and after that they have little idea or intent to do a large-scale deployment. And on the other hand, the startup is struggling to support the client across different geographies where they don't have any support. The fourth is trust deficit. Corporate is very reluctant to give their data, their corporate data, to the startup because they are not very sure how that will be treated. And on the other hand, the startup is worried about their IP, which they are handing to the client, right? Because for the startup, the only thing which they have is their IP. And finally, what I call is a leadership deficit, where because of leadership and commitment issues on both sides, we are not able to take this to a logical conclusion, which we would like to do. So these are some of the reasons why, while there are compelling reasons on both sides, we don't really see the value creation which we should see between the two entities.
That was very, very enlightening, Avnish, because I think what we've seen is especially if you're an enterprise startup and you want to reach, and who doesn't, you want to reach Fortune 500 clients, you absolutely need partners like these, right? Who will also not only give you the access, but add different dimensions to your solutions of making them more secure, more scalable, more reliable, right? At the same time, there's a lot of challenges you have to overcome, right? Which, very grateful to these companies and these leaders who are actually helping bridge that gap, right? Okay, so this session, I want to make it a very interactive session. So, please do ask all the questions you want to, right? I'll just kick it off with, a question for Margaret. Margaret, could you talk about the journey of a startup from especially looking at it from the lens that you see, which is, you start out with a certain dream and then, hopefully you get into a partnership and acquisition. How do you see that life cycle and what should entrepreneurs be at least cognizant of?
I'm super energized to talk about this particular topic. I think that a lot of times CEOs and founders of startups, they don't think of the day after. They imagine success being acquired by a big company, and they don't do enough thinking about what does that mean to them the following day. I have one very, very good friend, and her company was acquired in Spain 3 years ago. I've watched her for 3 years struggle with the understanding that now she doesn't own her IP. She got paid handsomely for it, but she is no longer the guardian and the visionary behind where the IP goes and what product solutions. The IP has been taken by a big corporate for a nice handsome sum of money, but it's being used as the corporate saw the value of the IP being used. And you know, there's lots of statistics and there are lots of online stories about why startups don't do so well once they're acquired into a big corporation. And I think that a lot of it is that there's a natural friction that happens the day after. So each one of you that have your dreams for your startup, I really want you to realize, what does that dream mean the day after? And if it is your dream to just sell and you haven't thought about the day after, maybe it's time for you to see what your goals are. Do you want to do a series of startups? And at that point, you negotiate your exit as part of your deal when the check gets handed over. Do you want to take some experience in working on a big corporation? And if you want to do that, and that's a different bag of tricks too. I mean, I have worked at Intel now for 5 years, and I feel that I am in startup mode and reinventing myself every single year, particularly with older companies, like a company like Intel that's 50 years old. The company has to disrupt itself rather than be disrupted from the outside. And we're currently going through a huge transition within Intel, and we need leaders that have more of an entrepreneurial spirit. So I think really it's important for startups not to think only till the point of being acquired. Think about what is the value of being invested in by different companies, and it ought to be a two-way win. I think that that's the most valuable advice that I can give to people.
Thank you, Margaret. And that actually resonates because I'd never worked in a large company. I've always been a startup person. And when we were acquired by Cognizant, actually I very consciously stayed on. I was actually given some advice by somebody I really respected. Spend some time there. Just you learn a few things that are holes in your experience and knowledge. And I ended up spending over 4 years, which was way more than I had planned. It was very frustrating at times, right? You really learn things which, how large companies work, which doesn't resonate sometimes, but it was a very educational experience. So, very good point. You plan what you're in it for, right? Avnish, a similar question. You've worked with, you've seen a lot of startups, you've seen their journeys. What are some of the mistakes that these companies make as they engage with you and with other large companies? And how, what advice do you have for startups who are looking to engage with large companies like yourselves?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, Subinder, because there is a lot which is said about corporates learning from startups, because especially when we are living in a VUCA world, speed and agility is all what we care about, and the rest of it is all forgotten. But, unfortunately, if you see the statistics, more than 90 to 95% of the startups fail, right? That is the harsh reality of this particular world. And very few products are able to get into a critical mass of users, and very few ventures are able to just get out of the shelf. So there are obviously issues which are not being addressed in our, adherence to basically speed. And unfortunately, a lot of these are relating to sound business and management policies, which is the boring thing which the corporates do, right? And the startups are obviously not interested in that. They would like to go with speed, and they have an attitude of just do it. And we will look at the implications later. But I think that is something which needs to be addressed right up front. You need to see that you have a particular vision, you have a particular strategy, and you have the right governance and financial controls in place. This should not be an afterthought, because if it is an afterthought, then the only thing you get is chaos and underperformance, right? That's something which we need to look into. And I think the corporates do a reasonable job of that. Secondly, I've seen that startups struggle to articulate the market size for their product and solution, right? They have a vague idea, but they're not able to articulate that. They're not able to articulate the kind of margins they would be able to realize by selling their product. And these are things, again, which are second in nature to a corporate. Corporate is very clear in terms of what their market size is. I'm sure Margaret will agree with that. What kind of market share they can get and what kind of profitability they can get as well. So I think that's something which definitely the startups can keep in their mind. The third thing is that the corporates are actually judged by the street, and they are judged by the business outcomes they produce. It is not the innovation or the breakthrough design which they are coming up with, and that's true with even companies like Apple. If the Apple products were not able to get the business results for Apple, I don't think the street would have been very amused, right? But on the other hand, the startups are very excited about the innovation, the technology, the design which they are coming up with, and maybe not that much focused on the business outcome which they are about to or should produce, right? The last bit which I like to say is that, again, the corporates are very focused on profitability, so bottom line as well as the top line. And we know a lot of startups, especially in the B2C space, are more concerned about customer acquisition, how they can quickly acquire customer base, how they can improve their market share, and not that much focused on the discipline and efficiency which is required to get profitable very quickly as well. So these are some of the things which I think there are good learnings in the corporate world which the startups will be good to emulate. But obviously corporates learn a lot from startups as well, and I'm not going into that because that's pretty obvious.
Great. Guys, feel free, show of hands, any questions at this time? Can we get a mic there, please?
While you're getting him the mic, I do want to say my core goal and my core mission within the Intel Corporation right now is to work with global ISVs and startups and SIs in order to help you be successful. So we're not the evil empire. We actually have a vested interest. I'm not running for a P&L. That's not my particular role. I want you to be successful. So you're based in India. We have a maker lab which incubates within the Bangalore site. And I really advise you to look into that and look into the Intel Developer Zone, which gives free sample code, technical articles, and is here to help you.
So Avnish, this question is for you. So you mentioned that startups have to learn a lot of things from the corporates. But when you look into the startups, they're pretty small and they don't have that kind of a bandwidth like a large corporate might have. If they focus on the corporate governance, if they look into all these pieces around how they would be doing a business at a later point of time, then they would lose the focus on the disruption which they are bringing onto the table. So how do you think it can be balanced?
Right. I mean, my answer, and then I will hand it to you to answer. Programs like what we're doing with our Maker Lab is very much to try and address that gap and work directly with you. I think a lot of why startups fail early is they don't know when to bring in the experts. 3 very, very smart engineers can accomplish so much. At a certain point, you need a very wise CFO. At a certain point, you need a very wise business analysts. A lot of times, we go too long with a very smart idea and it ends up nowhere. So again, look into the corporations and look into what you can get out of the corporations in terms of free support. We learn from you. We learn from the solutions that you're trying to address in the market, and we give you very direct feedback. The program that I had mentioned earlier, we've worked with 19 startups. Now 14 of them have a product and 7 products have launched. That's a huge success measure to me, and I was very motivated a couple of days ago when I met 2 very young men who are working on a startup with regards to battery charging on cars and some of the problems that us as a society are going to be addressing in the near future.
Thanks, Margaret. I think it's a very good question. So when I say that there are things to learn, I don't mean by any chance that the exact management principles which are getting deployed in a corporate world need to be replicated in a startup. But just to give you a few examples, for example, if you look at the kind of focus the corporates do on marketing, sales, and branding, right? Ultimately, you have to sell your product and you have to sell your solution. Our startups are more enamored by the by the technology, by the platform, and how many more bells and whistles they can add to that, while there might be hardly any customers who are there to take the full stack. So maybe the 10% of your technology is already serving 90% of the customer requirement, right? So I think, for example, principles like lean manufacturing, where you go and do very quick iterations, getting the customer input back into your product, rather than looking at a long-term cycle where you come up with a perfect product. So these are some of the things which can be tweaked from a corporate world. They don't have to be necessarily replicated. But again, if you don't have the vision, you don't have the strategy, you obviously don't even know where you are going. So definitely you're not going to reach there. So my request to the startups is that definitely adhere to your speed, your agility, your disruptive nature. But at some point of time, you need to bring some order to the madness as well.
We're running out of time. One last question. Can we have a mic there, please?
Hi, I'm a journalist from Business World. Question for Margaret, actually. You work with all kinds of companies right now. When you are dealing with startups, what stands out in the way you need to change the way you talk? So how do you change your tonality or your mindset or your advice? What are the questions you're asking? What are you looking for when you're talking to startups?
That's a wonderful question. And that's a question that has been, one of the things that I've enjoyed in my entire life journey, right? I am somebody who grew up in rural Ireland, a 5 million population country, who moved to Silicon Valley and made it. I could only have done that by learning what's important to the different cultures. My current job is responsible for working with ISVs and SIs and OEMs in Europe, in Latin America, in PRC, and here in India. And each one of those cultures have different needs for me to address and respect too. I have to respect the government regulations on each one of these countries. To me, and talking to startups, it depends on where the startup is in its life cycle too. A lot of times there's the energy and the passion and there's the big dream and they're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg and they just know it, right? And I don't want to be the one that kills that passion and that dream, because, quoting from Steve Jobs, those who are crazy enough to believe that they will change the world are those who eventually will, right? Then there are the startup cycle that you've gotten to the point where you're almost disillusioned. The dream is starting to get a little bit jaded. You haven't reached the status that you wanted to be in your 5 years and you're putting in 24/7. As a human being, I like to work with human beings from where they are and see how I can help them. My own personal goal is to try and change the world to be a better place. And we start with human-to-human interaction.
I'll just add one more point to what we do differently when we are interacting with the startups. So my team, which is here, it's a small startup as well within Accenture, right? A 4-member team. And we behave more like a startup than a big organization like Accenture. And whenever there are issues or things which need to be addressed between Accenture and our startup partners, you will always find me and my team on the side of the startups, which really irritates our own organization. But I think in the end, it is for the good for everybody as well. So I think we understand and empathize the DNA of a startup organization, and we understand that a lot of other people in Accenture may not be able to do that. So it's our job to act as a bridge maker between the startups and our big corporate clients, or even Accenture, to make sure that we are able to address these things.
So I heard you irritate the evil empire in fighting for startups. I'm sorry. No, great. So thank you so much. I think we've learned the big corporates are equally eager to work with startups, and I think we should come out and reach out, leverage what they offer. At the same time, map your journey, understand what it means, and be prepared for the final outcome, especially the day after, like Margaret said, right? And otherwise you need to make sure that you marry the best of what large companies bring, which is scalability, reliability, security, right? Integration into the enterprise architecture, absolutely essential for you to be successful, and that's what you can get from these partners. Okay. With that, thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot for the great panel.
My pleasure. Thank you.